Hi, one of the most common questions I get asked is, how do you record your music? Because if you've only seen the videos of me doing tuition, you might not know, but I've recorded quite a lot of music over the years. And people say to me, well, where do you go to record it? Who records it for you? What kind of gear do you use? Well, the truth of the matter is, I've always been an avid home recordist since the 80s, when I had a cassette-based 4-track machine, which was amazing at the time, but very crude by today's standards. And that allowed me to record something and then overdub something else without wiping the first thing, and again, but only 4 times because it was a 4-track machine. Over the years I've used lots of different systems, but right now my recording studio is actually just a desk over there in my living room, and I'll show you that setup in a moment. And also some other setups I've used in recent years. Now, before we start, I should emphasise that this is a video on getting started with recording. It's designed for people that really haven't a clue where to go. There's a whole load more stuff that you will want to look at as you get more experienced at recording. But really, this is to get you started. You might have a hardware device for recording, something like this, or maybe a little portable recorder like this with built-in microphone. Both of those are quite specific to manufacturers, and you'll need to get the manual and look into those. But even if you do use one of those, it's quite likely at some point you will take the card out of that or connect it to your computer and want to bring that audio into your computer in order to turn it into something that you can share online or burn to a CD, whatever you want to do with it. Finally, I'm doing all of this on Windows-based machines, but that's just what I'm doing. I'm using specific gear on a specific operating system, but I will look at different manufacturers of equipment and talk about these in generic terms. So if you've got a Mac or even an iPad, you'll still be able to do this. It doesn't really matter what machine is at the heart of your studio. So now I'm just a few feet away from the sofa I was sitting on over there a moment ago, and if you've ever seen me on a Zoom session or had a private Zoom lesson with me, you'll recognise this background, and this is where I sit at my desk with my computer and my webcam when I'm doing teaching like that. And you'll see the setup in a moment. But first of all, I'm just going to put some stills up on the screen and show you the kind of things that you might have in a very simple home recording setup. Here's about the simplest setup you can get. It is a laptop. It's not a special laptop at all. It's not a particularly overpowered laptop. It's the standard kind of Windows laptop in my case, but it could be a MacBook, or it could be, even an iPad. And then some kind of USB microphone and a pair of headphones. Of course, you'll also need some software, but we'll look at software in a moment. We'll just look at hardware for now. Now that's a really simple setup. You need the headphones to be able to listen back to anything you've recorded before so that you can record something over the top of it. And the reason you need to have headphones is if you're listening through speakers when you're recording another track, you're going to end up with the microphone picking up the sound from the speakers, and we don't want that. Also, laptop speakers are not very good for doing, high definition audio work like this. You want to be able to listen carefully. So a reasonably good pair of headphones, a USB microphone and a computer to plug them into. And, as I said earlier, some software. Now, if we already assume that you have a computer of some kind, that USB microphone you can see there cost me 80 something pounds. And the headphones, I think, were about £15. You don't have to have anything massively expensive, and you can get cheaper USB microphones than that one. That one's quite handy because it has a headphone socket in it, and you can see a little headphone volume on the front, which means I can use it as my input and my output for listening to what's going on. And I can easily adjust my headphone volume with the dial on the front of the mic rather than having to go into my settings on the computer and keep adjusting my headphone volume. So if you already had the computer, that setup is going to cost you less than £100. And software-wise, there's lots of free software out there that can get you started. Here's another setup, and this exact setup I have used to record several albums. The computer bit is the same, the headphone bit is the same, but instead of a USB microphone, which is a microphone that plugs directly into the USB socket of your computer, I have instead got an audio interface which plugs into the USB port of my computer, and then a microphone and a mic cable which plugs into my interface. Now that seems like adding lots of things for no good reason, but my audio interface has more than one input, and it can also accept electric instruments. So if I want to plug in the output from a pickup on a ukulele, or an electric bass, or an electric guitar, or a keyboard, I have another input on there, and I could plug things into that. Different audio interfaces, and there are many on the market, will have different numbers of inputs, and you can choose the one that's most appropriate to you. Because I work on my own almost all of the time, I don't need one with many inputs, so mine has one microphone input and one input that can be line level or instrument level, so I can flick that switch depending on I'm plugging in something like a keyboard, a synthesizer, which would have a line level output most likely, and flip it to the instrument level if I was plugging in, say, my bass guitar or electric guitar. The microphone you're seeing on the end there does look very small, and that is a perfectly normal microphone, and that could be one of many types of microphones. I'll show you a little bit about microphones later on and some different types. The important thing to remember about both of those setups as well is they're extremely portable, because everything is being powered by the computer. So as long as you've got one plug socket to plug your computer in, or if you're not recording for very long and you want to risk doing it on battery, you could even record somewhere outdoors using a setup like this. I'll show you a video in a moment where I use almost exactly this same setup to record at someone else's house, and I was able to simply put it all in a bag and take it round there.
Stealing, pretty mama, don't you tell on me. Well, I'm stealing back to my same old used to be.
And finally, here's the setup I'm going to use to demonstrate things to you in this video. Now, this is what I've used for probably about the last 4 or 5 months since upgrading from doing it on my laptop. What you're seeing there is actually, well, you're not seeing the computer. The computer is a desktop computer hiding under the desk, and that's the monitor on the top. I've got some speakers that we haven't seen before, but everything else is something you've seen before, and anything else on there that isn't something we've seen before isn't crucial at the moment. There's a CD burner on there, which is great if I want to burn my final music to disk, but not necessary at all. Oh, and the tiny dinosaur on top of the speaker was knitted by my daughter, and it's not essential, but it's quite nice to have. Now you'll see in this one that I have right at the front the microphone you saw before on a stand pointing towards us, and I also have the USB microphone behind it. For the purposes of this demo, I'm not going to be using the USB microphone. I'm going to be using the microphone on a stand into the audio interface. But it sits there because I use the USB microphone when I'm doing Zoom calls. As you can see, I've got a webcam on top of the monitor, and I've got the USB microphone just under the monitor in the right place to pick up my instrument and voice when I'm teaching. So for now, ignore the USB microphone, ignore the webcam. The other thing we have are the speakers, and as I mentioned before, you don't need speakers. You can do it all with headphones if you like. But it's nice to have speakers because you get a better representation of what your music will sound like when it's being played through other people's systems, maybe being played in the car or through a Bluetooth speaker. Now, the particular audio interface and the particular maybe USB microphone or the microphone on the stand or the speakers, there are so many different models of those available. What I have here is an audio interface that costs about the same price as the USB microphone, about £80, not particularly expensive. The speakers cost just over £100 for the pair, which again is a lot of money, but bear in mind you don't need the speakers to get started. I didn't rush out and buy this all in one go. I gradually built this up. I'll probably add other things later, but at the moment this serves the purpose nicely. The microphone that you're seeing there is this tiny little one, which is a Lewitt audio, and this is a small diaphragm condenser, sometimes called a pencil condenser. Now this is a very small one, and it's ideal because I don't have a lot of space here when I'm sitting at my desk. I don't want a huge microphone, but you'll often find this kind are longer and sometimes a bit fatter. These ones you sing or play into the end of them, just like you would say the vocal mic at karaoke. They are end address, which means you sing into the end. But that's a very good kind of microphone. It works very well with acoustic instruments. I also find it works quite well with my vocals. It's got this little foam cap on the top, and that's to try and cut down on some of the sibilants and the pops that you sometimes get with p, p, t and s when you're singing. But we'll talk a little bit more about microphone techniques later. But a microphone like that is great. This particular one, again, cost about £80, which isn't a lot for what's a very good quality microphone, but you can get them much, much cheaper and get still very good results. Now, this microphone, this big thing, is, if I fold this down, I'll show you what that is in a moment, is a Rode NT1A. And this is also a condenser microphone, like the last one. It has a bigger diaphragm. That last one was a small diaphragm. The diaphragm is really just a thin membrane that vibrates in the air, and that gets translated into electrical signals. The diaphragm in that first mic was a small diaphragm. This one is a larger diaphragm. It doesn't really make masses of difference when you're recording. You'll get a different sound from them, yes, but both of them are really good microphones to use to record. This one, rather than having a little foam thing on the top of it, has this little fold up pop shield. And this pop shield is really just made of the same kind of material that tights are made of, really. What it does is, as you sing through it, it will stop direct blasts of air hitting that diaphragm. It sort of, spreads it out a little bit, it disperses it so that the p, p and s don't hit it as a burst of air and give you a nasty popping sound. This is sitting in a nice little shock mount, and this kind of mount with the elastic just isolates this from any noises that might be picked up through the floor on the stand. So, people walking around, things like that. So it's quite nice to have that. And this is a kind of microphone called a side address microphone. You don't sing into the end of it or play into the end of it. It stands upright and you sing at the side of it. It's important you sing in the right side of it because it only picks up on this side of the microphone. It'll pick up on that side a little bit, but this side mainly. And most of the microphones you'll come across when you first start recording are what's called a cardioid pickup pattern. And if I look at the top of the mic, it means that it picks up all the way around this side of the mic, but as it gets to the sides, less so, and as it gets to the back, hardly at all. And when that's plotted on a graph, it kind of looks like a little upside down, in this case, heart shape. One final thing about microphones is that those two microphones I've shown you, the condenser microphones, require power. And that power is sent back down the microphone cable from my audio interface. And mine has a little button on it that will either say phantom power or plus 48 volts or whatever. You press that button and that sends that bit of power back down the microphone cable to power the microphone. You may have a microphone a bit like this one already. This is a fairly standard vocal microphone for stage use. This is a Shure SM58, which is pretty much an industry standard vocal mic. This sort of microphone is called a dynamic microphone and it doesn't require power. So if you've got an interface that doesn't supply phantom power or 48 volt power back down the cable to your microphone, then you'd only be able to use a dynamic kind of microphone. There's nothing wrong with that, but you just need to know that if you're going to use a condenser mic, then your interface needs to be able to provide it with power. The good news is that almost all of them do, so you don't have to worry about that. If all you've got is this kind of microphone, then go for it. It's often not the best kind of microphone for recording instruments, but try it out. You might get some great results. There are great records that have been made with vocalists using microphones that maybe weren't the one the studio engineer would have, thought of straight away, but it worked for that person's voice. It got a great effect off that instrument. So work with what you've got, until you're in a position to get something that might be better. Okay, let's record some tracks. I've got my microphone here. It's plugged into my audio interface. My audio interface has the phantom power turned on, so that's working. And you may be able to see just here, when I'm making a sound, there's a little light flashing here, and if that light were to flash red, then I'd know that my signal going in was too loud and might distort. If it weren't flashing at all, then it's too quiet. There's not enough signal to get through and give me a nice clear sound. So what I'm going to do is record, first of all, a baritone uke part. So I need to find the track I want to use, and I've selected 3 tracks here, and I can easily add new tracks if I want to. Now I've got 4, and then I can easily delete tracks. I'm going to put on track 1 my baritone uke. So first thing is I need to arm that track, which means I hit this little red record button. It's not recording at the moment, but that's told it that when I do record, that's the track I want to record onto. Now when I record the track, I'm choosing to play along to the inbuilt click track like a metronome on here to help me keep everything together. You don't have to do that. You could just play and sing into the microphone and make your recording that way, and that's fine. But this is what I'm going to hear when I'm recording. The problem is I don't want the microphone to hear that, so I need to turn off my speakers, I need to put on my headphones, and then when I record the track I will hear the click, but the click won't get picked up by the microphone. So you can probably see that I've got a nice little waveform appeared on that track, and I can play that back, and if I want to I can turn off that click, and you'll hear that that click hasn't been picked up by the mic because I had my headphones on, so we've got a nice clear recording of just the baritone uke. Now I'm going to do the same thing and record a soprano uke track. So here I am ready to record the soprano uke. My speakers are off, the headphones are on. I need to make sure that I stop arming that first track and arm the next track I want to record on. Otherwise, I'll just record over what I recorded before. Here we go. So now I have 2 waveforms, and when I play them back I can turn off that click and you will hear the baritone uke and the soprano uke. Now I'm going to add a bass guitar. Now this is an electric instrument, so I don't need the microphone. I can plug it straight in to my interface. Right, I've got my bass guitar, it's all plugged in straight into the audio interface. I've stopped recording on the track I recorded before. I've armed a new track, but this time something a little bit different. I don't need to put my headphones on, and that's because I'm not using the microphone. This instrument is plugged in. It's not going to pick up any of the sounds in the room like a microphone would. So this time, even though I could use the headphones if I wanted to, I don't have to, and you'll be able to hear what I was hearing in my headphones before as I recorded. So let's lay down the bass track. There we go. So let's have a listen. At the moment I've not attempted to adjust the volumes to mix them at all, so whatever volume they are, that's the volume I recorded them at. I can change that in a moment. Okay, that's good. Now the software I'm using is Ableton Lite, and that is often called a DAW. And there are lots of different kinds of software that are known as DAWs. A DAW, D-A-W, is a digital audio workstation. It's the audio equivalent of a word processor. You have a word processor, you might use Microsoft Word. but you might use a different word processor. They all kind of work in very much the same way. Buttons might be in different places, features might be slightly different, but if you use one, you can probably find your way around the other one quite quickly. DAWs are the same. Why do I use Ableton Live? Well, it came free with my audio interface, so it was the obvious choice to install that and get things up and running, and I've never felt the need to change because I'm used to it. It does everything I want it to do. Now, most DAWs work in the same way. They will have the track view like this, where you can see the waveforms of the things you've recorded, and that's handy because I can see where things happen. So if a track didn't come in till halfway through a song, I'll be able to see that. I can also see if any of my little peaks on here are too high and have overloaded and things like that. Good for identifying problems. But there's another view that you can switch to, which is the mixer view. And this will look like a mixing desk. Now, this is going to be quite hard for you to see at the moment, so I'm going to zoom in on another project and show you exactly how the mixer view works. But basically, it means I can change the volume of each of those tracks to get them to sit nicely together. Okay, so here's a typical view in Ableton Live, and this will be very similar whatever software you use. I've got multiple tracks here I've recorded. I've got guitar, mandolin, banjo, baritone ukulele, a washboard track and a vocal track. And if I hit play, and you can see from the waveforms when things are going to happen. So I can see that the vocals aren't going to come in till here. And I can skip forward, I can stop and start from a new point.
Woke up this morning, found something wrong.
So I can hear where the vocals come in. And I can flip my view to what looks very much like a traditional mixing desk. And every time I add a track, I will get another strip added to my mixing desk. So if I had more, I could fill up all of this space here. If I play the track now, I'll be able to solo, so you just hear the one track, or turn tracks on and off, or alter the level of the tracks.
Woke up this morning, found something wrong. My loving babe had caught that train
off the guitar,
won't you starch my jumper,
turn off the banjo, turn off the baritone uke.
I'm gonna ride that train.
I can turn the back on, and I can just solo the mandolin. I can alter the volume of each one by dragging this little fader, turning down the vocals so they're barely audible. You don't want them too quiet, but you also don't want them too loud. And this is what people talk about when they talk about mixing a song. Now we've talked about mixing, it's worth talking about our levels and what's too quiet and too loud. In a moment we're going to get this session of Ableton and we're going to turn it into a file that is the complete song, whether that be a WAV file or an MP3 file that you can do something with. You can burn to disk or email to someone or upload to one of the services on the web. If you're going to do that, the last thing you want is a track that is so quiet that when it's compared to the tracks around it, it's barely audible. But also we don't want one that's so loud that it starts to overload and distort. Let's have a look at our mixer again and see how we can use some of the indicators on there to tell us what might happen when we start to turn our mix into a final song. Here we are in our mixer view again, and I've zoomed in on the bottom part of each one of these track strips. You'll see here there's a little white lozenge shape, and in there is a number with a minus sign at the beginning. And that's the peak level for that track. And as I play the track, you'll see the level meters are all jumping up and down. And every time they reach a new maximum that they've never been to before, the little number will update. I can see at the moment that this one is peaking somewhere around -8. This one's peaking a lot lower than that. The good news is though that none of them have lit up to warn me they're peaking too high. Now if I turn one of those tracks right up, we might be able to get it to overload. Oh, see what happened there? My vocal track, this one here, lit up as a warning to me. It's gone above 0. If it goes above 0, that track is going to distort. And digital distortion is not a pleasant sound. You don't want that on your recording. So the first thing you need to do when you've recorded and you've got your mix and you're setting your mix is to watch these here and make sure that none of them ever light up to warn you that they're going to distort. Now we were focusing in on the tracks over here. Now I've zoomed out again. You'll notice that over on the other side of the screen there are also some channel strips, and one we're going to look at right now is the one labelled Master, which on my screen is right over on the far right. So let's zoom in to that side of the screen. Here we are on the other side of the screen, and my Master fader here also has the same fader that I can slide and the same little peak marker here. So as well as each individual track being able to show you how loud it can potentially be and whether it's overloading or not, the whole combination of those tracks, all of these come together through this Master fader. In fact, if I play the track for you now, woke up this morning, and I turn down the Master fader, my loving babe everything gets turned down. And I can see the peak here. Now, if I were to have too many tracks, too loud, oh dear, my whole track is now overloading. You might even be able to hear a little bit of distortion on there. So I also need to watch my Master fader. What I want is something here that peaks close to distorting but not distorting. And a good place to aim for when you're about to mix your track down finally is somewhere about between -1 and -2. Now if you're going to master this yourself, or if you're going to send it to a mastering engineer, you might want to set that much lower. They tend to like a little bit more headroom to play with. But if you are going to send it to someone to do that for you, ask them what level peak they would like, and then you can export your file with this number peaking at the right one to keep your mastering engineer happy. But we'll talk more about mastering in a moment. So my track is peaking, and I can keep doing it, and this is a time-consuming process because you play through the track, you check things, you go back, you play through it again. Always remember that just because one bit of your track, one chorus or one verse peaks at a certain amount, it doesn't mean that every verse will be like that. You might have dynamics in your track that mean that certain parts of your track will peak very loud and other bits won't be so loud, and it might just be one thing, one note, one word that you sing that could really push that level up. So now what I need to do is look at turning all of this into a simple file that I could email to someone or upload somewhere or burn to a disk. Now, as I've said before, every one of these DAWs, these digital audio workstations, these bits of software, they all work a little bit differently. So you won't necessarily find these things in the same menus or using exactly the same words. But what I want to do, and in my case it's going to be in my File menu, which is quite a likely place for this to be because you're creating a file, you will have something along the lines of export, mix down, whatever. I've got export audio here, and when I do that I get a few settings. Now if you see these settings, they can be really confusing, but there's something you need to know. However this track was recorded, it's going to need to be exported at the right settings to be able to be used by hardware players, software players, CD burners, things like that. So the best thing is to make sure if you can choose bit depth, that your bit depth, I can choose 16, 24, 32, I need that to be 16 because CDs operate at 16-bit and lots of hardware players and things like that will operate at 16-bit. If I have a sample rate, That could be, well, there's loads of different ones there. It could be 44,100, it could be 48,000, it could be 96,000. I need that to be 44,100. 44.1k it might be written as. And that, again, is the standard for CDs, for example. 44.1, 16-bit. And if you have a file type you can choose, and you're going to want to burn this to a CD, choose WAV file. I simply hit export. I've already exported it once. I'm not going to export it again because otherwise I'll wipe over my original mix. But there it is. And once I have that file, I can just double click on it in Windows and it will play in whatever media player I have on my machine. I could also use CD burning software to burn it to a CD. Some software will also let you export as an MP3 file. Mine does. I can actually export that WAV file and I can turn on this one and export an MP3 at the same time, which is great because then I'll have the WAV file which is uncompressed. So that WAV file is something that is as close to your original audio as you're going to get, whereas an MP3 file has been compressed. When it's compressed, of course, the file size gets a lot smaller, but if you compress it too much, you'll start to hear that it's been compressed. MP3s are really useful though if you want to email them to people because they're just so much smaller, they're less of a hassle to add as an attachment to an email. There's one proviso, and that is if you're going to send this to a mastering engineer again, and I will talk about mastering briefly in a moment, if you're going to do that, then you're going to want to send them the best quality you can. They will deal with turning it into something that you could say burn to a CD. So you can see I recorded this track. That little marker there means I recorded this track at 48k. So I would leave it at 48k. I know I recorded it at 24-bit, and I would send them something that was just basically how I recorded it, but mixed into one file. They can drop it into their system, they can master it, and then they can send me back a variety of different formats, MP3, WAV suitable to put on a CD, things like that. So now you have your song as a file and you can do whatever you want with that file now. You may still find that even though you've been careful with the levels, your song, if you put it in a playlist with, say, commercially released songs that you might have put into your software from a download service or a streaming service or ripped from one of your CDs, they might sound still louder and punchier, and in comparison your track sounds a little bit weak. Well, there is something you can do about that, and that is a process called mastering. Now, this video is not going to go into mastering. Mastering is an art form in itself. Yes, I do master my own tracks, but it took me a lot of time learning how to do it, finding the right ways of doing it, learning how to trust my ear as well. However, there are services that will do it for you on a track-by-track basis, and there are some that offer pretty good results for just a few pounds. So if you're going to release this track commercially, you might consider using one of those automated online mastering services. Now, it's no substitute for going to a real mastering engineer, but that's something that is often just far too expensive for most people who are recording, particularly if you're just recording as a hobby. You don't need to master the track though. If you're just going to use that as something that you want to listen to or just to share with your friends, then your mix will be just fine for that. So get out there and record your own track. Make all the mistakes that I made. You will make lots of mistakes. Don't expect to get a perfect studio quality, release quality track straight away. You'll make lots of mistakes along the way. You'll find lots of things out about your playing as well, because when you record yourself and listen back in great detail with your headphones on very critically, you'll start to spot things about your playing that you don't like as well. I know when I first started to record, I hated the sound of my own voice. Whenever I played something, I was aware of every little buzz, rattle, string squeak or whatever. Don't get too paranoid about that. It's easy to do. Just do what you do, use what you've got, and record music. And don't forget, when you've done it, to share it with us so we can all hear it. I hope this has been useful to you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.